All right, everyone, we'll get started this morning. I'd like to welcome you to the statewide lab partnership call this morning. I want to welcome you and just really glad that you could sign in this morning. Please make sure and sign in to the chat box. This is our sign-in sheet. It does reflect how many have joined us today. So, is anybody from DHHS on, please?
Last name F, then last name.
Oh, am I on WebEx?
Hello.
It's a lab phone call.
Just kidding.
Yes.
I didn't see my face anywhere.
I hear some background noise. If you could please just make sure that your mute is on meanwhile, and yep, you're good now. Who's on from DHHS, please? Is anybody? John, you're on, of course.
Hey, Sadie is on from DHHS. DHS.
I got you. Thank you, Sadie. All right. All right. Do we have any new staff between MPHL and DHHS, Sadie, that we should just let everybody know?
Yeah, we have a couple new lead program EPIs. Zach Hicks is one, and then Danielle Wing. We also have a CDC Foundation officer, Annie Chenley. I think that's it.
Okay, that's awesome. Good.
One more CDC Foundation individual here as well. Actually, over in the lab. We'll step down and see you a little bit later, Karen. But we have Rachel Collier here as well.
Awesome. Good to have them all here. Thank you. A lot of new faces, and I'm glad I asked. All right, let's go on. Is Robin on today? She was not able to be on maybe, or just running late. Can anybody share on the influenza surveillance program? I believe the surveillance kits have gone out. The letters have been sent to all our surveillance sites. You would your surveillance site because you have been asked to send in a number of specimens to us. Any patient at the very beginning of the season, in the middle of the season, and toward the end of the season, of course, we are asking that you take these specimens from any patient that has what we would call the ILI, which is your influenza-like infection, and take that nasopharyngeal swab and go ahead and send it to us. The materials for packaging has been supplied, and if you have any questions about that particular program, Robin would be the one to ask. Since I don't hear from her, does anybody have any questions about that influenza program? Okay.
Hey, Karen, this is Gerald. Is anybody seeing influenza right now? We've tested. We haven't seen any yet.
I think there's been a few, Gerald, that's a good question. I think there's been a few sent to us, but nothing that have truly been positive yet.
Hey Karen, it's Emily. I can confirm that we are starting to see sporadic flus pop up across the state. The Sentinel providers which participate in this flu surveillance program have not sent us any here at NPHL that we can confirm by the CDC real-time PCR assay, but there is news of these starting to trickle in throughout the state. So we are starting to see the influenza activity pick up.
Gerald, again, because our doctors just like to know, because they won't start testing until they hear others. They kind of play off that. So, this Gerald.
That's good to know. We'll keep you posted in that regard.
This one?
Any other questions? Please please put your mute on. I do hear some background, but don't put your phone on hold if you happen to be on hold on the phone. All right. I did make a comment that I would like to ask you all a question, and that is if you can reach or have been reaching your local health department. Do you know who to reach at your local health department? Have you been in communication? I'm hoping you have been because of COVID, but I want to see a show of hands. And that the way you do that, I believe, where do you do the show of hands? Well, just make a comment here. You can do it even privately if you'd like, to see if you do not know who your person is at your local health department. I do think that's still very important. Sometimes there is a change there as well. So please let me know if you're not aware of who's on. So anybody that does not. Okay, in the chat, it does appear that most do. So, okay, let's go on. Sadie, I'll let you take it for Brianna as far as Epi. Anything new from a month ago, or really 3 weeks ago since we've talked to everybody?
I know, enterics have really slowed down after the summer. Now we're starting to get into norovirus season, so just want to give a heads up to the labs. Whenever we have norovirus outbreaks, we work on getting specimens sent to our state public health lab. So in order for it to be paid by state funds, we need it tested there. So if you want to relay that information to your send out text, if you have them, you may occasionally get specimens and outbreaks with the MPHL test rec. That just needs to be forwarded to MPHL with the courier. But that's all I really have.
Okay. Any questions for Sadie? Anything that you've noticed in your hospital? Okay. Emily, since you're on, or Pete, would either of you like to let us know what's happening at MPHL?
We are still knee-deep in the COVID response. We are working to expand capacity on that one, as well as I am working this week to get ordering and reporting in place for a new multiplex assay that we are hoping to get out as soon as possible. We have verified this assay in-house, which will be able to test for both COVID as well as influenza in a single assay. And the results look really good by the verification. So now we just have to put the IT of that end of that in together, and then we will have a better idea of what's going on during this very interesting respiratory season that we're all preparing for this year. Outside of that, I will go ahead and reiterate what Sadie said. The enterics are starting to slow down, though we are still seeing them across the state. Of course, we will see those year round, but the volume is just decreasing. And we are ramping up to prepare to help support any influenza activity that we do note during this upcoming flu season, as well as supporting the noroviruses that always happen, during the winter.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yes.
You were talking about the influenza testing being done along with the COVID. We're going to be starting to do that test here, but is there any way we could get influenza samples from the Nebraska Public Health Lab, or we're just wondering about correlations?
Which assay are you going to be running, just so we have a better idea of what targets?
The Gene Expert.
The Gene Expert, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. We are going to be bringing up that assay as well to work as an overflow. So yeah, we can work with Pete and see if we can start getting you guys out some challenge panels to use for verification specimens if you don't have previously stored influenza positives in your stockpile.
Do not.
Specimens.
We
Okay.
do not.
Yeah, if you'd like to reach out to me or Pete, we'd be happy to help with that. Always happy to assist testing coming up across the state.
Okay, thank you so much.
And if that was Kathy, certainly send me an email at thekstyles@unmc.edu. Or to be honest with you, for anybody to pick up, there's an email that I have here on the agenda, nphl@unmc.edu. And all of our staff will be able to pick that up. So if I'm gone, someone else will reach it right away. So feel free to email any of those questions or requests to NPHL. All right. Thank you. I know, Gerald, did we answer your question? You did ask, they're having you fax your positives directly to them so they can start their social tracing immediately. That's good to know as far as your local health departments. So makes sense. Okay. Thank you, Emily, for that. As far as point of care, I wanted to bring up that whole topic. I don't know what I have shared. There's so many different things that I do share with you. I wanted to see, I'm going to bring over to the screen. Can you see supplemental information on wave testing now on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is written for the BINEX now only because I'm working with Dr. Matt Donahue to put into some of the long years a BINEX now. Very simple test. Emily's done quite a few too, and she can speak as well for this antigen card. But there are definitely things, as we've talked about, that with point of care that you need to know and be able to do before the testing and after the testing. Unfortunately, the manufacturers' videos tend to only deal with that of testing in itself. So again, we want to make sure that you are aware of what's happening in your community. If you get questions or if you've been asked to do some of that testing as well, be aware of where you're placing the system if you're testing, how you prepare for it. Make sure that you find a good clean area to test that is out of the way of traffic. Ideally, especially something like the BINEX now is designed to literally do in the patient room, but that isn't always convenient. They are short-staffed. They may ask someone else to do it in a different location of that particular facility. And the importance is safety. We really want to stress, even with these types of tests, they're point of care, they're easy to do, but they continue to present a risk of aerosolization. So wearing full PPE, the gloves, the gown, the surgical mask, and surgical mask and the face shield is definitely required. And it's required for both collection as well as testing, whether it's right there at the patient bed or taken to another area to test. We're really stressing now that we want to make sure that you're washing hands or changing gloves. And if that isn't possible, you're going through too many gloves, that at least you're using hand hygiene, which requires leaving your gloves on, but using the alcohol-based hand sanitizer to clean your gloves, and make sure that you do that between the patient tests, especially a positive one. So very important to know. Obviously, the laboratory work practices we have, of not eating, drinking, or any of that at the test site, and always disinfecting. So I wanted to then bring up the discussions of just whatever point of care you're doing, whether it is the Binex now, we're dealing with aerosolization. Normally we can't see it. This image here in the center does show because they put a black light into it to make it more obvious of what kind of aerosolization takes place. So think about that. If it's getting on the side of the cards or little instruments you're using, it's getting on your gloves, it's getting elsewhere. So do remember that this does happen. Binex now does require that you literally rotate the swab once you put it into the card. Emily, is it 5 times? She may not be on, but I believe that's what the instructions say. So with that, I wanted to ask if anybody had questions about their point of care, if they've had any issues with their point of care, figured out something different with their point of care that might be good tips for others to know. Could you please share those? Any suggestions?
Keep it in the lab.
That is helpful, isn't it?
Well, it's so much more controlled. I mean, our staff know how to do the testing. They know how to reduce the risk of carryover, that sort of thing. And we've been pretty successful doing ours in the lab because we're doing it in a hood. They're doing all of the hand hygiene, and we have not had problems with ours. But we're also talking about, since you brought up the nursing homes, we're talking about trying to get a couple of people that can actually go to some of our local nursing homes and just give them some tips on the handling the samples and handling the cartridges and making sure that they're not carrying over in their area, maybe even looking at their area and see how they have it set up. These places typically don't have a laboratory, you know, so they're working with a countertop.
Right. They're used to doing maybe at the most a dipstick. What else would they do? I don't know if they even do strips in these situations. That's really cool to hear, Christy, that you actually go out to your sites. Has anybody reached out to your local health, or excuse me, your long-term cares? Because that's fabulous. I know that they will on occasion ask ICAP for assistance. They may call MPHL. If you could reach out to them, make a point of that, get to know them. They are not as familiar with doing testing. Anybody else have experience with their local or long-term cares?
Our good Sam's under Sanford, so I think they've done a pretty good job of making sure that they're all validated, because I know they were going to change on the fly because they first got I can't remember, the Sophia or whatever, but then the cartridge allocation wasn't out, so they switched to the Binax, and they wouldn't let them switch it. So I think Sanford's doing a good job of kind of locking that down before, making sure they're trained before they do it. So on our
Awesome.
end, so Good Samaritan is under Sanford's thumb, which helps a lot.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Let's talk logistics when doing these particular types of tests. You know, as I've worked in the clinical lab for years, remembering doing the Binax now for strep pneumo, for RSV, and for Legionella. So when you get quite a few of them, how do you do the setup? How do you put the drops in? Do you do all the drops at once? Do you do all the swabs at once? How do you guys go about doing that? What's the most appropriate way? I had to ask that question too when I finally called the manufacturer.
at least for us, whenever we get multiple, we try not to batch them too much because we try to separate them. Because whenever you batch something, it's very efficient, but it's also one step. Instead of one mistake, it's 5 mistakes now because you just did it over 5 patients. So we can count on that really. If we can kind of separate them, not saying you can't stagger them, where you
Right.
set up and set, you got your multiple time timers and slide it over, but we try not to do any of that type of stuff just because it literally is tough.
Right.
Especially, just making a mistake over several patients, that's ugly.
Yeah. And actually, that is a good suggestion. Thank you, Gerald. I have admittedly done it both ways. And in asking what the correct way is, found out that it is more correct to go ahead and add your drops, add your swab, rotate, close, start that timer. If you've got more to do, then go on to the next one, do that, start your timer, or maybe just make sure you're working every 30 seconds. But that is the most accurate way to do it. And that's something good I learned from the manufacturer. So yes, maybe not as efficient, but is by far definitely the more accurate way to do it. Exactly.
Karen, this is Pete.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, Karen, this is Pete.
Yes.
Just to weigh in a little bit more on the antigen testing, this is a program that has been set up by the HHS, federal government, to put these kits out into these nursing homes. 3 different kits, 3 different manufacturers. We know under the best of circumstances that these tests are not as accurate as PCR. We know that.
Dana has Lyle, and Dana has Lyle, so she'll let him know when she's done.
Go ahead, Pete.
I'm
Sorry.
still here, Karen. Yep. So there are issues with sensitivity. There are issues with specificity. And we've been working with the state to try to define what might be the most appropriate places to be using these types of assays. And of course, it's been a challenge for us. We've done some verification testing, and we know kind of how good some of these tests are. I think what it really comes down to is that all the training in the world for these nursing homes, we are still going to deal with issues because of the turnover of people. These are non-laboratorians. They're not going to follow these directions to the letter, which is what we would require. And even if they did, these tests are not as accurate as we hoped. So I think we need to be prepared from the laboratory community to be doing confirmation testing under multiple circumstances. And we are working with the state to try to define what might be an optimal confirmation program for these nursing homes. And this is it's ongoing, I should say that, but I think us in the laboratory community need to be aware that this is an issue. We're going to be confirming positives in some cases. We're going to be confirming false negatives in some cases. And we need to be prepared for testing by PCR to do some validation. And it needs to be a quick turnaround. We can't validate tests 3 or 4 days later. We're going to have to do these very quickly. So we're going to have a process in place of how to do this. This is an ongoing discussion right now, and it's not where it needs to be, but we're working on it. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions that laboratorians might have on this issue.
Pete, this is Gerald from Syracuse. One thing that I was concerned about is some more of the refluxing they're doing, because lots of times they're saying positive on these antigen tests, and then they're putting those patients together. Well, that's a bad idea if they're a false positive. And so are they kind of seeing the error their way and saying, hey, we need to get the reflex on that first before we put 2 positive patients together, knowing that that second one may not be true positive?
Yeah, that is
after you put them together.
Yep, that is part of the process that's now in place, is not to put these people together until you get a confirmation test.
Okay.
I don't know what's being done at individual nursing homes. I can tell you that at least one of the antigen tests that we've done some testing on, the specificity is less than 50%, meaning a lot of false positives. So, that it's an issue. It's a big issue. The positive predictor value of some of these are not very good. And we know the sensitivity is not good as well. So they need to be used appropriately.
So Pete, could you do a huge favor and kind of go through statewide what so far has happened, what point of cares are out there and where they're placed?
Yeah, I don't have the exact answer to that, but I know that many nursing homes have received the Quidel Sophia test. They've received the BD Veritor test, and there is some rollout with the Abbott Binox now, but I'm not sure how much has been rolled out with that particular test. We have quite a bit of data on the BD Veritor from the standpoint of confirmation of positives. We do not know how good that test is for sensitivity. We do know that the positive confirmation is well less than 50% by PCR. We do have minimal data on the Quidel Sophia to show that it's about 75% for its positive predictive value. We, again, do not know the sensitivity of that particular test. And by the way, if you read the instructions for use by the manufacturer, be very careful, because the manufacturer's performance will tell you that these are 100% sensitive and 100% specific, which is not true. You also have to remember that all of these tests are being used off-label. They were not approved to be used for asymptomatic people for testing, which is also a big issue. CMS is allowing this to happen under an enforcement discretion protocol, meaning there's nothing else to use, we're going to use it off-label. The Binox now, we've completed 2 different clinical studies, and I don't want to get into all the details about the Binox now, but I will tell you that the Binox now, as far as false positives go, that it had a 100% positive predictive value, meaning it did not have false positives in our hand. Sensitivity is another issue. So that's kind of a rundown, Karen. I know some facilities have all 3 different test kits in their facilities. And I also know that some facilities have run out of reagents for one test, so they're going to another test. So they're being asked to be trained on multiple platforms here, which is also very difficult as well.
Good point. Good point. Thank you, Pete. Again, I can't stress enough that I think it would be extremely helpful to reach out to your local, or your long-term cares, see what you can do to help them out. It certainly can't hurt. So any other questions about point of care training? All right, hearing none, I think that we do all have a question on a biosafety tip about pneumatic transport, if that can now be used to transport specimens from different parts of the facility down to your laboratory. So I have asked a number of biosafety experts. I won't mention it at this point, but I want to see what you all have been doing. So I'd like to hear some feedback to think what you would think biosafety wise. Anybody? Well, let's ask this. Who is anybody transporting it via pneumatic?
This is Christy at Bryan. We are allowing them to tube their dry swabs.
Okay.
So the ones that don't have any media that can leak out.
Yeah, That makes perfect sense. And of course, it's being transported in the biosafety, or excuse me, the biohazard bag. Hopefully those are sealed properly.
Yeah.
So
Double bag.
okay. Yeah. Now when shipping, I always recommend that, yeah, you put it in one small bio bag and then you can take multiple small bio bags and put it into one larger bio bag. But more than likely the floor doesn't have that money to send, so they're going to double bag it, which I think is important as well. That's what we taught for Ebola, and I think it's warranted here. But going back to the pneumatic transport for specimens that do have the viral transport media, everything I've been told is no, that it still can't be done. I know it's done for influenza, but because of the virility and the contagiousness of this particular organism, people still recommend not using the pneumatic system here at this point. So I know it would be more convenient, but for safety reasons at this point, I don't think it's recommended by the biosafety experts. So,
yeah, we're getting a lot of pressure to send like strep samples through the tube system, but one of the ED directors, she actually said, well, we had one patient that we did the strep and it was negative, so then we did a COVID. And I'm like, so you suspected that, you know, it wouldn't have been a good one for you to send. So we're struggling with where is the line really, and frankly, we feel like we've already given them more than we probably should have, but it's a challenge because they're also going, well, what about, you know, you're tubing blood and you're tubing all these other things, and I'm trying to explain like the difference and the risks, and it's
right.
Just, yeah.
It's all about the risk. It's all about the infectability of this particular organism. It doesn't take much, even a drop. So, yeah, if I were working and had a broken tube, I'd be pretty scared. So, any other thoughts on pneumatic transport? All right. Going on, I wanted to also bring up a question that a number of people have asked. It appears that some of the salmonellas being sent in for banking, that our client services has been calling back asking for some extra paperwork, namely susceptibility. And Brian, Lenz, are you still on, or Pete? Can either of you or anybody else answer that?
Yes, I'm here. But what specifically were you asking about paperwork?
So our client services has been calling back to people who are sending in salmonellas, and they are asking for extra paperwork.
What do you mean by extra paperwork? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm thinking MICs.
Karen, this is Emily. It's
Yes.
my understanding that's what's happening is when a stool is submitted for a salmonella or E. coli isolation or something like that, the RPS staff is simply reaching out to the submitting laboratories to get a copy of the paperwork for the lab printout for which indicated the organism that they're looking to order the isolation on. And it's my understanding that they're simply doing this for one, to verify that there isn't dual pathogens present and that they don't need to order a salmonella isolation as well as like an E. coli isolation, or that they are just basically double checking that the correct thing is ordered so that we do not get an unable to isolate due to an incorrect check box being placed in a salmonella box when it should have been E. coli. So I think a lot of this is that they're asking for copies of like a GIP result, just so that they confirm that the correct test is being ordered and that additional testing is not necessary.
Okay, that does make sense, Emily. Maybe it's being sent in for banking and no one has written down the name or something. So we just need better information. I would think that if you have a positive, which is a reportable that you need to send to NPHL, please make 2 copies of that GIP result and send one with us to save a phone call and to clarify what is needed. Does that make sense for any other questions along those lines? Thank you. Okay. I've already hit the contact numbers written there, both phone number and email. Happy to say that we are very much trying to answer our phone live. We do have it rolling over to multiple people now. So you shouldn't get, maybe in a rare instance, will you get an answering machine. So please utilize those 2 methods to get a hold of us just in case I'm on vacation. All right.
Everyone, I just want to add to that. We do have the phone number rolling to multiple people, but we are in the labs a lot of times. If it's an emergent situation, please do not hesitate to contact the NPHL pager. But if it is the 24/7 pager, which you should all have access to, we understand that, you know, every once in a while, all of us are unavailable, but we want to meet your needs. So please reach out to that if necessary. I also want to add that our nphl.org website is down today. We were notified of this very early this morning, and so we are working to get that up and running. If there's any information you need in the meantime, once again, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, Emily, good to know. But good point. Our pager is always there, so that does alert us right away. So please, if you don't hear from us live, try that methodology. Any reason why our site is down? I have not heard this, so.
And we can talk offline after this.
Okay, so we'll try to get that back as soon as possible, because I know people do use that. It's hopefully good reference, and if people can't find what they're looking for, let me know. I try to make it as easy as possible. So, and we can make those changes on our website pretty fast, which is great nowadays. So, any other open topics, open mic things, you guys, parking lot things that you would like to talk about? All right. As a reminder, we still have our lunch and learns available on our website, which obviously can't get to today, but the BT training will be available through the end of the year. But the end of the year is coming fast. So if you signed up, I have quite a few people who have signed up and have not finished. They might have done 1 or 2, but they do need to complete that. So as a manager, I do encourage you, if your staff has not gone through this training before, please ask them to consider it. Even if they haven't signed up, they can still do so. Just contact us. And there are 3 or 4 that you can watch, recorded, hour-long. The last one is very long, so it is 3, but the last one is a little much longer, so to cover 4 or 4. So there will be packaging and shipping online as well. And I do recommend to look at everybody's shipping certificates. If they're over 2 years, it would be worth doing this new type of training that CDC has provided. They just put out the new one here about a month ago. Last but not least, there is some training that is considered virtual reality when it comes to doing your BT rule out and refer. The LRN has provided this training. I think it's just kind of a fun game to go through. So do highly recommend it as well. All right, so I do have a question on the chat. It says, is the PowerPoint from the last meeting regarding correct ordering of testing between influenza and COVID available online? I think it is. Once the site is up, Diane, I do believe that I did put up last week's, but I'll check just to make sure once it's up, and if not, I will make sure and get it up as soon as possible. So thanks for asking. Any other questions? All right. Our next meeting will be November 9th. We are going to try to do the second Monday. The reason this was moved back to the third Monday is because the first Monday was a holiday for the state. And that's usually when we do our meeting alone with DHHS. So November 9th, and hope that we'll all have you back again. Don't hesitate to call if you have questions before. So last but not least, if you have not signed in to the chat, please do so. At this point, I'll leave it up for another 5 minutes. So thank you, everyone. Glad you could join us, and have a great week. Bye-bye now.